Welcome to a very haunted Halloween special, my dice goblins. I have 4 new sets of dice for you to devour.
If you're into that sort of thing, I guess. As the title leads you to believe, we are making spooky Halloween dice, but we're not just making spooky dice, we're making only dice that you have suggested in the comments. So that's nerd dice, eyeball dice, which I'm taking to be googly eye dice, pumpkin dice, and bone dice, which I'm also taking to be skull dice because it's a little bit more Halloween-y than just regular bones. So let's start off with doing pumpkins, and when making the pumpkin one, I'm using the great big D20 that I made in my last video. Why are we using that giant mold? Because it's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. Why not make it the bigger version? So if you want to know how to make the molds on these, I'll tell you which videos you need to check out. So check out the big D20 video from my last one. So I'm filling this up with these tiny little pumpkins. They're very hard, they're just really thin, kind of hollow plastic, and we're filling this mold up about halfway, maybe a little bit more than that. I'm anticipating this to take 2 run-throughs of resin because there's going to be so many air pockets when we put it in the pressure pot. The resin will go down to the bottom, that's great, but it'll leave a huge void of air, I guess, up in the very top, so we'll have to run this through twice, but that's fine. Let's move on to the resin. Because I'm making such large quantities of resin, I'm using old reliable, cheap, but good Art and Glow. And now, going on to the safety, you want to make sure you're wearing nitrile gloves and wearing a respirator rated for fumes. I will link the safety data sheet for the Art and Glow resin down at the bottom so that you can learn and educate yourself so that you can work properly with the resin. This is a 1-to-1 mixing resin, so by volume I mix 1-to-1, and I make sure that I mix it for a solid 5 minutes. If you have trouble with your curing resin, you're probably not mixing it enough. Go ahead and put a paper towel down. It makes cleanup easier in case you accidentally spill resin. I'm prone to do that, so I make sure to do it. Now I'm going to fill this up with resin, and it'll look like it's overfilled, but because there's so many air pockets, once we put it in the pressure pot, that's going to go down. I tape it up to seal it, and you can see here, I made a miscalculation. Because I have my multi-layer pressure pot insert, I thought this would work fine, but the big old pumpkin one is far too big to fit into that, so I kind of had to jam a bunch of them in there. And you'll also notice I'm doing 3 at once, so when I'm doing the pumpkin one, I'm also doing the eyeball one and the nerd one at the same time, so you may see some of my stuff sitting out as I'm talking about them. Just know that I was trying to knock out multiple sets all at one time, so that's why there's multiple in there. Now, as I said, that was not enough resin. After I took it into the pressure pot, only about half of it was filled up, so I had to take it out, fill it with some more resin, throw it in the pressure pot once again, but boom, that is our Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. That is an awesome dice, but we'll get back to that. Let's move on to the next set. The next set we're doing is the nerd dice, because you can't have Halloween without having some sort of candy, and as soon as I did my M&M one, everyone suggested doing nerds, so I wanted to do a set of those, and I had a few boxes of nerds, so why not? I'm basically brute forcing these. I fill the whole thing up with nerds as much as I possibly can because they'll move out of the way whenever I put the pipette in there, and then I tape it up just like normal. You want to make sure that you do that on all of them. The candy will push to the edge as you put the pipette in, so it's really important to have that tight seal from the tape around the outside. If you don't have that, you could risk spilling your resin all over. Now let's set some of that aside as a snack for later, and we've got that extra resin that we mixed up earlier. As I said, I was doing this all at the same time. If you take a pipette filled with resin and push it all the way down to the bottom, because it's kind of coated in resin, the candy will actually move out of the way on its own. I haven't had a problem with this, and if it doesn't, your pressure pot, if you have one of those, will pull the resin all the way down to the bottom. This would be one that would be very hard to do without a pressure pot because they're gonna get a ton of air bubbles. But as you can see, they came out pretty good, and I actually mixed some of the colors on some of the dice, and that made it even more appealing. Make sure you cut off the sprues while the resin is still a little bit soft, but now let's talk about our eyeball dice. One thing that I can recommend that I think will take your googly eyes from good to great is gluing 2 sets of googly eyes together so that they become almost like a round eyeball. Otherwise, you're gonna have this white backing, and it's gonna take away from your eyeballness, I guess is the best word for it. I basically jam these in the same way. Because I've got the pressure pot, I have the ability to brute force it, and the resin will just kind of go on its own and fix any problems that I may or may not have had. So you can see here, fill it up with eyeballs, just as is a normal sentence to say in an everyday life. Use the tweezers to adjust and grab that snack I saved for later. Now the thing that takes my dice from googly eye dice into horrifying Halloween dice is a drop of red alcohol ink. I put it right over the eyeballs without any resin on there. By doing that, you get a pretty neat splatter effect. So I push the resin down and you'll get half transparent, half of this kind of red smear look, which I wanted it to be like a bloody eyeball that had just came out, or one of those little bouncy bloody eyeballs that you got as a kid, right? I think that works really well. I think it gives it a nice change. I will note though, as a warning, your molds will be dyed red on the inside. You can see in here, there's very obviously the red set compared to the rest of the resin when looking in the pressure pot. But bam, those are done. They jiggle around on the inside and they're super fun to play around with. I promise I will let you hear what it sounds like shaking them towards the end of the video if you stick around for that one. So cut the sprues off while they're still a little soft and move on to the skull dice. Our end goal is to get that gray skull dice to look something like this, a very bony effect, and this is by far the most work that we'll have to do in a dice. So that Citadel skull set is this. You can see a bunch of skulls here. I'm going to clip them off with the sprues. I'm not going to do a ton of extra work cleaning these up like I normally would with a model because they really will get lost in the dice, right? So I have these little corks with some poster tack on them, and they're great for holding little mini things like this while I paint them, because if we leave these gray, which you're more than welcome to, but I want mine to look bony. So I put them on there and I'm going to use some white paint. I water down the white paint so that it gets into the recesses of the skulls, and I paint all of them. It actually takes 2 coats to get a decent coat on there. If I was painting minis, I probably would do more than that, but 2 coats is good enough. I do both sides because you can only do a little bit at a time, and to get that bony look, white with a Seraphim sepia or a brown wash that goes through them will give you close enough to a bone look without having to do a ton of extra work. Again, these are going to be inside some dice, so I'm not putting as much effort as I normally would into these. Because they're on this poster tack, they actually have these weird lines on them from where they kind of were stuck, but I think it gives them a much more haunted and spooky look, so I wasn't worried about it. I actually kind of like how it looks. Filling up these molds, I put 1 set of skulls into each one, and I leave 1 extra skull for each of these to put in at the end, but I fill maybe 4 or 5 skulls in the center of each of these molds. I use some tweezers to get it down, and I mix up some extra resin. This is actually the resin that I use both for the second part of the pumpkin and for these, so you'll see I made a lot of it. Now, a lot of you always ask, how do I get a swirl effect? And I'll show you how to get a pseudo swirl one with some alcohol ink. I like using this pitch black one because it's kind of a greenish tint. It's very Halloween. I put 2 drops in there, and you can see I mix it maybe 5-6 times. That is it, pushing down from the sides, and you get this fantastic looking haunted swirl effect. And if you pull it in with a pipette, aiming to pick up some of those black swirls, you can see that's actually in the pipette, and that'll transfer down into the dice as you squish it down. And because alcohol ink evaporates on its own, you don't really have to worry about it not curing properly. Alcohol ink is fantastic for this. After I fill the molds up with resin, I take 1 extra skull and put it in there. I will say a problem is these skulls actually float. I didn't know that in the beginning, so these are kind of randomly mixed in there, but I am mega happy with these. These are by far my favorite sets out of all of them, and I want to show you why those swirls work. Look up close at this. Look at that kind of smoky effect that you get out of these dice, but we'll come back to those because for now I have something to give you. Because all of you are awesome and keep buying things from Die Hard Dice and using my name when you buy things, I keep getting more sets from Chris and Sima, I think I'm saying her name right, to send out as giveaways. So I'm also doing a Halloween giveaway, and let's look at some of the sets I'm going to give away. So I'm going to do 3 winners again. One of the winners is going to get this metal orange set. It is a fantastic spooky Halloween set. The quality is just as good as all the other metal ones. It's just orange and Halloween themed, so that's awesome. The other winner is going to get 2 of these more orange dice sets that are kind of this bony orange, as well as a purple playmat. It's a leather one on the back. It folds up real nice, and it's super easy to click, 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 click back together, and you've got yourself a nice purple dice mat. You get the purple dice mat as well as 1 dice set and a couple D6s. The other winner will get the orange dice set as well as a purple RPG set and a bone gray set. When you look at these, they're very matte. They almost feel almost like bone. It's not just straight resin plastic when you feel them. You can kind of get some of that texture here on the camera. But I want to say thank you to Seema and Chris. I think I'm saying her name right, but she got my name wrong. She put Ryan, not Rybonator. That's interesting. But either way, I'm hosting the dice giveaway tomorrow, actually, instead of when this video airs, and it'll be on the community tab for my YouTube page. I'm not going to require Twitter or anything to log into it, so this is more of a YouTube themed one. If you want to see those community updates or regular posts besides the video ones that I post up, turn on the bell notification to find those earlier. But with that, let's talk about the dice in a little bit more depth. I found this awesome coffin style dice tray. It just happened to be a coffin decoration that works as a dice box, so I'm using it. Let's talk about the Great Pumpkin one. I'm leaving these uninked for this video because I want you guys to tell me what you think a good ink color would be for these. I think, personally, that a green would be really nice to go with this pumpkin-y orange. It would be very much like the stem and tie this whole thing in. This is probably my least favorite. I think it's a very gimmicky dice, but as far as Halloween gimmick dice go, it's pretty cool, so I'm happy to keep it as part of my sets. From my least favorite onto my absolute favorite is the bone dice. I'm actually making these as the grave cleric dice for somebody in my party because all of her spells are smoke themed and it's got skulls in it. I think it's going to work perfectly, so I do need suggestions on what you think a good color would be. I'm leaning towards like a grayish silver right now for the ink, but you can see all the skulls shine through. I told you there was a problem with some of them floating, so they're not quite as randomly dispersed as I would like them to be, but I still think they look awesome. The black swirls really turn this from this kind of clear look into this really dark, evil set. So I would say that the skull set, by far my favorite. I was not expecting to like this one as much as I did, but using the sharp edge dice mold really made this look awesome. Rather than this rounded candy look, it makes it almost look like this weird alien space theme. If I was going to play a mind flayer in a campaign, I may actually use these nerd dice. The pink one looks like brain and the purple one's very psychedelic looking. The D4 is actually one of my favorite ones, and the D6 has this kind of nice color combo, as does the D12. I'm always a fan of D12 dice. I think they show off really nicely. I think maybe just a white would be good for the color on these, but let's move on to the googly eye, the horror eye set. I actually want to head off some comments on this one because there's so much air in the googly eyes. Of course this is unbalanced. This is purely a for fun set, but it's so fun. Listen to it. I would say that it's probably not as unbalanced as we think, but isn't that just joyous to hear, right? Wouldn't you roll that on the table and think it's amazing? I think the blood spatter that we had on this could have been done better. I think it might have been beneficial to wait a minute with the alcohol to kind of evaporate before pouring the resin. But either way, it's very spooky, very horror-y, and it turned out fantastic for this final set of the Halloween spooky dice. I want to say a quick thank you to Die Hard Dice again for allowing me to do another giveaway for you all. Remember to check my community tab on YouTube tomorrow for details on that. And a thank you to all the people who suggested things like this. I love interacting with you guys down in the comments and getting amazing ideas like that. So with that, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you might want to see more, or share this with some other spoopy Halloween friends or people you might want to make some dice with. With that, I hope you have a fantastic day and an even more spooky Halloween, you dice goblins, you.